Hey folks, here are OS Reviews. Today you're watching our video review of the Sony Xperia Miro. This is a very inexpensive, budget-oriented Android smartphone with a 3.5-inch display and also an 800 MHz processor. It also comes equipped with the Xperia UI on top of Android 4.0. What makes the Miro kind of an interesting product is it has a colorful notification light that can change depending on the theme of the phone, and also it's very inexpensive. It's an unlocked GSM device, but you can pick it up at a street price right now for under $100. That's pretty competitive, especially if you want a compact Android smartphone and you really don't need a flagship device with a 5-inch or 6-inch display. At 3.5 inches for the display, the Miro is also extremely compact, so you can take it with you. Taking a look at the hardware of the Sony Miro first, you can see that it actually is a pretty well-crafted device. The back is constructed out of a soft touch material, which makes it very easy to grip, and the entire phone comes in at 110 grams, so not too heavy and also not too lightweight. The front is crafted out of a tempered glass display, which is resistant to any scratches, and also can be viewable under direct sunlight, which is another plus. With that being said, the screen is a huge fingerprint magnet, and after you start touching it, it will start accumulating a layer of grease. The front also features access to a front-facing camera that has 1.3 megapixels and works pretty well even in darker environments and also in earpiece. Below that, you have access to 3 capacitive controls for home, back, and menu. And also there's a metal strip that Sony has put in with an interesting chin design, a little bit reminiscent of the original G2 by HTC. And of course, we have that notification light, which is very, very unique and kind of futuristic looking. It changes colors depending on the application and also on the theme, so it can go from green to blue to pink to yellow at a flick of your control. The back features access to a 5.0 megapixel autofocus enabled camera with LED flash, but no vanity mirror. The top features a 3.5mm headphone jack and also a power on and off switch, a little small for our tastes. The left-hand edge features access to a micro USB port for charging and syncing. Fully charging the phone takes about 2 hours to complete. The other side features access to a volume rocker that's a little bit small as well. Behind the battery door, you have access to a micro SD card slot for expanding the 4 gigs of memory even further. There's also access to the SIM card slot. As aforementioned, the Xperia Miro does not have 4G LTE connectivity here in the States, so it won't get 4G speeds if you use it with AT&T or with T-Mobile, but you only have 3G data. With that being said, you do have Wi-Fi, there is Bluetooth and also GPS on board, and there's also 512 megabytes of RAM. However, the phone still runs pretty nicely despite these hindrances. Underneath the hood, you also have access to a 1,500 mAh battery, which lasted about 2.5 days in our tests before we had to recharge the phone. So yes, with a smaller processor and also a smaller display, the Miro has pretty good battery life compared to other phones out there, especially with larger screens on the market. Overall, the Xperia UI isn't anything we haven't seen before, especially on Sony's other offerings, but it's one of the cleaner installs in terms of Android skins that we've seen from manufacturers. Overall, it does a good job, especially if you're a first-time smartphone user, categorizing your applications and making the experience pretty easy. There are a few pre-installed applications on the Miro, despite the phone being a unlocked GSM device. You still have some special features installed by Sony. For example, you see some album tweaks. You also have access to some logo setup guides. There's the Sony Walkman player for MP3s. There's also a power saving mode that's built right on in, a Neo reader for scanning and reading barcodes. There's also a music and video application native to Sony. There's also Livewire Manager, WhatsApp, Chrome, Messenger, Facebook, Opera Mini, and Twitter, all pre-installed by the manufacturer, Sony. So you do get quite a lot of applications, although you can uninstall them if you don't really want to use them or need them. Now overall, we do like the clean look of the Xperia UI. Like we said, you have access to these home screens that you can slide back and forth and install more widgets. You can also pinch out to have access to a view of all your different widgets at once. And then you can also shake it to interact with your different widgets, and then tap on one to go to the page that the corresponding widget is on. Sony has also installed some of their own proprietary widgets on board, like this one for turning Wi-Fi on and off, the brightness on and off, and it actually works pretty well. Taking a look at the call quality next, the Xperia Miro actually does a pretty good job as far as the phone. The microphone does a good job of picking up sound, and we experienced no reception issues with both AT&T and T-Mobile here in Seattle. So as a phone, it definitely delivers. The touchscreen is responsive and easy to use. The viewing angle on the Miro is also acceptable, although not as wide as some of the more advanced smartphones on the market. Sony does a pretty good job with their screens, and this phone is no exception. With that being said, the pixel resolution and density isn't very high on the Miro. The resolution is only 480 by 320, which comes with a 165 pixel per inch density, which is a little bit low, and you'll definitely see text being a bit more blocky, especially on HD games, and when you're web browsing, you do need to zoom in more and more to see text, especially on complex sites like the New York Times. Taking a look at some other applications on here next, you have access to Google Navigations for GPS turn-by-turn directions, and also a built-in calculator. Basic organized note features are also pre-installed. The 5.0 megapixel camera on the Xperia Miro does a very good job. Surprisingly, again, 5 megapixels is not the highest count, but it's great at autofocusing very well, and it takes the shots relatively quickly. So you can see how colors are very accurate, they tend to be pretty well balanced, and the flash does a good job of not overexposing your subjects at the same time. You can toggle between different settings, including turning the flash on and off, changing the exposure, changing the settings for landscape, documents, close-up shots. You can also change it to have a sweep panorama shot, which works pretty well, and also you can change it back to the front-facing camera. And finally, tapping on the settings key gives you some more settings for geotagging, scenes, and a self-timer, and those work as well. As you can see here, you also have a tab of your recently taken images you can slide back and forth between, and you can check out your images that you recently took on the phone. And you can also zoom in using pinch to zoom. You can see the process is pretty lucid and detail is nice and sufficient on this particular phone's camera. Overall, a pretty decent camera is on board on the Miro. As far as video quality goes, you can also capture video at 480p with 30 frames per second, but it's not as impressive as the image quality is. So overall, we can see how Sony also has a nice emphasis on social media on this particular phone. So for example, there are the friend stream and also the feed stream, which allows you to have the ability to tag together your different networks from Facebook and Twitter and see your new updates as they roll out. So this does require a connection to either 3G or Wi-Fi. So if you are on a prepaid plan, you should probably note that. But these widgets are pretty easy to use, and we saw them on the original Sony Xperia X10 back when it was released about in 2010. So this is nothing really new that we haven't seen before. On the bottom here, there is actually a folder that's been pre-installed by Sony. It's called the Media tab. This corresponds to the album. There's also a Walkman player, which does a good job of playing back MP3 sounds. Speaking of, the speaker on this particular phone actually is pretty loud. It's decent for playing back music, and we were generally impressed, although plugging in a pair of 3.5mm jacks definitely improves the quality. There's also an FM radio, although you do need a headphone installed to act as an antenna, and also you have access to the camera. So taking a look at the device's QWERTY keyboard next, we can show you kind of how it looks like if we create a new message. You can see that the keyboard, although it's a bit small because of the 3.5-inch display, is actually pretty easy to use just because the screen is really, really responsive. Sony does a great job with their capacitive touchscreens, and again, the Miro is no exception. You can always use the accelerometer and create a larger keyboard for you to type on. Overall, typing is a good experience on the Miro, surprisingly for a 3.5-inch device, although it's not the most comfortable in the world just because of that natural space restriction on a 3.5-inch screen. Overall display, I have access to the theme changer for personalization, and there I can change it from sapphire to emerald, and if I tap on that, you can see how I have changed the color to green. I can also again change it to a lighter shade of blue, to silk, to a purple-ish color, a ruby, which is more of a pinkish color, to gold. So it really is pretty easy to use, and also notification light can be changed, as you can see there. A pretty neat way to customize your phone, at least in our opinion. Taking a look next at the web browsing experience on the Miro, it's a generally pleasing experience, although not the fastest we've seen before. It just comes installed with the native browser using WebKit from Google, but you also, of course, get the Chrome browser if you want to use a bit faster experience on your phone. So for example, we're going to go to Google, and you can see how it loads pretty fast over Wi-Fi, even though our connection isn't really strong right now. So we can tap on something like the New York Times. As you can see here, the Xperia Miro can load the full version of websites like New York Times, and this is a very complex page, so we're relatively impressed in that department. With that being said, the 800 megahertz processor definitely makes things a bit more sluggish, so you have to wait a few seconds longer, and also when scrolling through the website in general, you can see the flash elements are loading a lot longer than the other text versions are, and you definitely will experience a bit more of lag. With that being said, once the page has fully loaded, you do get a pretty impressive experience. Pinch to zoom is generally pretty lucid, and also text reflowing occurs at a pretty rapid rate, and also the entire column can be reflowed to the size of the screen, so you can read everything at a pretty comfortable experience. So especially if you're looking at mobile site versions of sites like New York Times, the experience is a lot faster and a lot more responsive, but you do have the ability to go to the full desktop version. With that being said, the processor is a bit of a hindrance in this department. The phone itself can also handle complex games to a certain extent. I would say that it can run some basic games, but if it gets into HD territory, or especially if you have multitasking happening in the background, then the Xperia Miro will get pretty slow and it might crash on you a few times like it did on us. So don't expect blazing performance in any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, it can handle most tasks and applications without too many issues. Again, you can see we have a lot of programs open right now in the background. The clock application is also pretty unique on the Miro. It's the classic Xperia experience, so you can set different alarms, you can dim the screen, and also it works pretty well as a bedside alarm. You can make it dimmer at night view and then wake it up by tapping on the display, so it's a nice feature to have overall. So in conclusion, I would say that the Xperia Miro is still a pretty solid entry-level Android phone because it's very easy to carry around. It's solidly built, and all the core functions from the video chatting camera to a decent 5-megapixel rear camera to a decent display are built into the phone already. And although the phone definitely has its flaws, we think that the excellent Walkman music player, a pretty nice user interface, and also a nice build on the phone definitely make up for those flaws. You can check out our full review on our website. For now, this has been our video. Thank you for watching. This is the Sony Xperia Miro.